The setting. In a story, a setting is everything. It can really help make a story interesting. You know, a story set in Mars versus a story set next door can make all the difference between whether or not someone wants to read it.
Right.
Even though the story itself may essentially be the same. I mean, you think about Avatar versus Dances with Wolves.
Yeah, versus...
but they're the same movie.
Yeah.
But your
Pocahontas
setting, yeah, I was gonna say, but your setting, exactly. But your setting makes a phenomenal difference to the audience. In a story, it all comes down to the author.
Right.
But on a TV or a movie program, you have the writer, the director, the set designers. You know, character is expressed both in the way a character is written, but in how they're shot,
from
the angles, how they're dressed. And I mean, I think it's really interesting when you look into the two actors on the series, Jensen and Jared, have talked about the thought that goes into the clothing that they wear. And they talk about how part of it has to do with, you know, the costume designers actually have to know a lot about what's coming up next because they put their padding under their clothing and all other kinds of stuff. But my students and I have talked about, especially in seasons 1 and season 2, if you notice, some of the really intimate scenes, the boys always have on less layers. You know,
which less layers for them is only 3 instead of 12.
Well, except that the scene in the junkyard where Dean is repairing
just a t-shirt.
Both of them are just in t-shirts. Yep. And it's because they were stripped down and raw. And my kids see this and they get into it. And the thing is, the writer may have had some of those thoughts in mind, but the writer, there were so many more people involved in that decision, and it's so much more a collaborative thing.
Yeah. Why do you think understanding, like, being able to do like visual comprehension and, you know, like analyzing video and television shows is important for literature analyzing?
Because it's the nuance. One of the stories that I use is actually the very first story that we use, and because I think it's a fabulous comparison to the series, is a story by James Hurst called The Scarlet Ibis. Fabulous story about 2 young brothers, and the youngest brother is born with clearly some congenital heart defects and some other issues. And when he's born, the family doesn't name him for a couple of months because they're not sure he's going to live. And then the name that they give him is a name that would only look good on a tombstone. This is stuff that's written in the story.
Yikes.
And the older brother resents his brother, but he loves his brother, and he's really, in a lot of ways, the only one that cares about him. But it's like a brother thing, where he resents him, but he loves him, and he drags him along with him all the time. And he eventually teaches his brother to walk, which nobody believed he would be able to do. But the thing that's really cool is, when I was talking to the students about it, we were talking about the first 2 paragraphs in the story were clearly an establishing shot, because it talks about the breeze moving through things, including a graveyard. And the kids were able to even figure out that clearly by the time the story was over, somebody was going to be dead, because this memory was coming through, but they were able to trace the wind through the story. And the thing is, but that's the same thing we do when we look at a movie. We watch, think about, and God help me for mentioning this, it's an awesome book, but it's an interesting movie for various reasons. Forrest Gump. Think about where the feather starts, and you're tracing through and establishing shots. And that's the other thing too, is I'll have them read now and they'll go, ooh, this is an establishing shot in the story. But for them, that's relevant. That makes sense how they would. So many times I feel like the reason that kids have trouble with reading as fun, the human brain, the average reader, we read 250 words a minute. We process thousands, like over 6 images in a minute. Our brains are so much faster visually, and we have cultivated that in our culture at this point. But if I can show them that there's no difference, and I can cause them to read and create the images, then they can follow, and they're creating their own movies. I want them to be able to say, this is not a good movie because it doesn't have these characteristics. This is a good movie because it is. And think about that. If we are teaching them what good literature is, what good storytelling is, think about how that could then continue to impact, and maybe we could have less of the really bad stuff. Because these are the kids that are the writers. And there's so much talk about how television and movies kills creativity. And I challenge people that say that to read fan fiction.
Right.
Which was actually the reason that I started this to begin with as an idea 10 years ago, was that I started reading fan fiction. And I absolutely admit that some of it is god-awful.
Yeah.
But the creativity that exists in fan fiction, and this was a situation where television was causing people to write.
Right.
Versus making people stop writing. You look at these creative feedback opportunities, and I think sometimes we've gotten so much into this mode of, it's what I said, the 21st century literacy. Mm-hmm. We've gotten so focused on 18th century literacy, right. Just looking at literature as text, mm-hmm. that when we're teaching in class, the kids see us as out of touch. It's not their world. Mm-hmm. Whereas by doing it this way, I'm incorporating their world. I'm bringing what they like, what they think, what they see. And
bringing the centuries together.
But I'm not doing it in such a way that I'm compromising on the ideas. And I mean, I'm sure that there are lots of people who would like it if I picked a series that was less supernatural than mm-hmm. supernatural.
Right.
And I understand some of those arguments. I would point out that one of the things that I also like about Supernatural is it is not, even though supposedly it's supposed to be marketed for women ages 18 to 35, my boys like it just as much as my girls. Now, if you hold it up and go, ooh, look at the cute boys, no, we have some trouble. But we don't present it that way. A lot of times it's how it's framed. But my boys are all watching this.
Right.
Second of all, the show, the nice thing about the show, all the bad things are bad. Mm-hmm. There is, I mean, yes, you do have some interesting things that come up later after you've built trust, but in the beginning of the series,
there are no shades of gray.
No, bad things are bad. Mm-hmm. There is no, well, sometimes they can be good, or maybe just if you're in love with them, or there's none of that. You have so many things about this series where even though it's science fiction or fantasy, which gives the kids lots of opportunities for creativity and thinking outside the box,
right.
It's set in our era, in our world, about the world underneath the surface, but it's our world, so you can work in both realities. I presented at this conference, a teacher asked me, what about middle school? And I said, I don't think Supernatural is appropriate for middle school. I would say that I could be doing lessons in middle school using The Simpsons. There are, 300 episodes of The Simpsons at this point?
Or Phineas and Ferb.
You could find 50 episodes to do over a school year. Think about the illusion qualities in that. Illusions with A, not illusions with an I.
Literary illusions.
My students and I have had a great conversation with that, but we have this graphic organizer, and one of the things is we do pop culture illusions, and it's been really cool to watch the kids do that because I thought I had most of them covered between myself and the Super Wiki. Mm-hmm. Kids are finding stuff I didn't think of.
That's awesome.
But that's the thing, is they're watching so carefully and so critically, but then they're also then applying that careful, critical view to when they're reading. Mm-hmm. It's just that I had to teach them that they could do it and that it was worth doing.
Right.
And one of the things I also like about Supernatural is sort of this metaphor of the world underneath that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. And I talk to the kids about how we essentially are becoming our own kind of supernatural because we see the world underneath that most other people aren't aware of anymore.
Mm-hmm. You're teaching a block class, so this is just this semester that
yes.
students. So what's your ultimate goal with, by the end of the semester, what are you looking to see happen?
I would love to see at the end of the semester, obviously my first priority is I'm trying to teach these kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, that should be everybody's goal.
Right.
I would love to see it, and my students and I have talked about it. I would love to see my students have some of the best. In Georgia, we have the end of course tests. Mm-hmm. 9th grade has an end of course test. It's a state standardized test. I am using all of the Georgia state standards, so I'm covering all the bases. But I would love to see my kids have the best test scores in the county, and I believe that by teaching them critical thinking and by looking at the whole picture on this versus teaching to the test and focusing on
strict vocabulary
exactly,
and whatever,
that they will show that they are critical thinkers, they can do better on these tests, and that this is an effective way of teaching. I care less about the test and more about whether or not they're learning.
Right.
But the test is a way of showing that they have learned.
Well, also it's a form of actual literal statistical proof.
Exactly.
That you can present as a way to keep teaching it.
Exactly. So I would love to have that, but I would love to see kids who now are watching television, but instead of it just being a mindless, glassy-eyed, drooling kind of thing, they are watching critically, they are processing ideas, which means that they are actually interacting and communicating with these people that they're watching, with all the different people that are involved, backstage, front stage, all of it. And that makes you part of the international intellectual world. They are plugged in, they are connecting. Another one of the things that's really cool about the series is they're constantly talking about research, and they're not just doing internet research.
Right.
They're going through books, they're going through records and all the other kinds of stuff. You see this stuff, and the kids are so good. I mean, the kids have kind of gotten tired of it. I'll stop it every time, and I'm going, what's this? They go, research! And we do research projects, but I actually do cases for them. And as we continue to go through the unit, they'll start not only doing research projects, which is the nonfiction writing, but they'll start writing fan fiction based on their research, when then of course becomes the creative writing. So I'm getting both sides of it.
Right.
Think about the huge amount of work that's all being generated. It's sort of like the show itself becomes a massive thematic unit. So I see a world where at the 9th and 10th grade level, this teacher's using this series, this teacher's using this series, and the third teacher doesn't use a series but uses more traditional methods. We put the kid in the right place. I mean, that's sort of, no child left behind or differentiation. We're looking for what's right for each kid. In education we do a lot where we try to be hip, or we try to be relevant and current with the kids, and sometimes I think we try too hard. If you as a teacher are passionate about what you're doing, the kids will go with you. But the thing about this is, for them, it's not me trying to be current and relevant. I've simply found something that is, and the kids go with it.
Right.
And they can identify with that, and they can apply to that. And then when they see these elements in a written story, they go and they transfer, and they're doing all of these things. And it's such an awesome thing to get to watch. I really hope that we cash into this in time, because it's the same reason that I wrote the book. It's great. Okay, great. I'm doing it. That's 50 kids. And I know of one other teacher for sure that I'm getting reports from who's doing it in Tennessee, based on my book. I have probably another 4 or 5 teachers here in the South that are planning to do it, trying pieces, or have said they're going to do it, but I haven't necessarily heard reports back yet. I was surprised. I heard from a teacher in Australia.
Okay.
I was floored, actually. She's been using episodes for the past 5 years, and she was using stuff from seasons 4 and 5, which...
much more ambiguous.
Oh, wow. She's using the end, which is a fabulous episode. I just don't know if I would be willing to do that in a classroom.
Right.
Especially not in Georgia. I'm using, in terms of the literature I'm using, I had a parent ask me the other day exactly what we were reading in class, and so I counted it all up because I gave her a list. We're looking at, by the time the semester's over, including the Odyssey, Romeo and Juliet, and Of Mice and Men. Think about George and Lenny, and then think about the episode Heart. You can't tell me. Anyway, but I counted it up, and with poetry, short stories, epics, novels, plays, we are looking at over 35 pieces of literature. In my class, in our school, we are on a 160-day calendar, and we've got a block schedule, and I have the kids for an hour and 40 minutes every day. I get them for 80 days because of our schedule. 35 stories, pieces of literature, novels, plays in 85 days. Now, we're watching 38 episodes as well. I'd like to see anybody else who's doing that much stuff, because that's the other thing.
That's a lot of content.
Well, that's the thing, is people are going, oh, but that's a huge amount. But my kids are going with it, and they're knocking themselves out to do the work.
Yeah.
To get to the next episode.
Right.
And then, and some of the other conversations, I had one kid who, she came to me and she says, I'm going to miss class tomorrow, but I need to make up this episode. And I said, sure. Well, it turns out she was missing class because she was in trouble with another class, and she had some repercussions she was having to deal with. So I went and talked to that teacher, and that teacher said, well, she's a really good kid, but she doesn't do her work in my class. So this child and I had a chat. Just, I mean, mentor to mentee kind of chat. And now she's doing her work in that class because she's like, ooh, I want to show people that I'm learning in your class, Miss Williams, and so I'm doing things in that other class.
That makes me a little teary.
Oh, it was, I mean, the encouragement factor on this, the kids are, I mean, And I have kids constantly coming up to me that I've had in the past. They're going, well, why didn't you do this with us?
Because I obviously hate you.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I have hated every child I've ever had.
Right, up until this point.
It's unbelievable. The motivate, because the kids feel like I'm listening to them, and they get it, and this is what they care about. And there's plenty of teachers who will come across something that causes the kids to get interested. It's not just about the fact that they're interested. It's that I'm not using, the thing is, I guess maybe that's sort of the cosmic joke. These kids think of the show as the reward, but I'm using it as the medium to teach them.
Right.
But the other thing too is all this other stuff that I'm slipping in. It's sort of like, you know,
slipping in your vegetables.
Vegetables, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like I'm slipping in their vegetables. But the part, you know, when I saw the kids making notes when they were reading the other day, though, I mean, like I said, I was having this moment where I was going, I can just see what's happening here. They're eating the frosting off the, what was it? The vitamin-filled, fiber-rich cake and leaving the cake on the plate.
Right.
No, the kids are eating the cake too. Rarely do we sit and watch an episode straight through.
Right.
I am constantly stopping it and pointing it out. And now they're getting to the point where they jump up and point stuff out to each other.
Right.
Which is cool. But, you know, this is not nobody is ever mindless. If you walk into a classroom where kids are watching movies, usually they have their heads down. Half the class has their heads down. Not in my class. They're writing. They have to write down all the locations. They have to write down the themes. They have to write down about tone. They have to give me an episode summary. They have vocabulary. They have questions, content, comprehension, and extension questions for every episode. They're doing the allusions. They tell me what characters are in the episode. They make notes. They have prediction questions that they have to answer. They give me information on character development. The other one that's actually been really interesting is they have to tell me whose perspective is the episode from. You should hear some of the arguments. And that's one of the big questions for season 1 is who is the hero of this series? Is it Sam or is it Dean?
Well, and you know,
and
you've
we
got
talk
kids
about
that they're really
and we have the whole thing about, you know, archetypes, and we talked about, you know, and that's the thing that's interesting too is we end up using the season guides. I mean, I don't just hand those out, but I've taken pages from that because they really want to know what was Kripke thinking. There is no roadmap for changing educational theory.
Right.
How do I get people to know about it? And starting with the fan sites and the local sites seemed like a great way, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about my project.
Well, thank you for sitting down with us. It was really exciting. I love this show, and I love reading, so it's a wonderful combination.
And those two things do not have to be exclusive.
Exactly. They're not mutually exclusive.